Hey guys, this is Arif from TechShare again. Today I'm going to explain what would be the best approach when you are going to fetch data from the Light CMS server from your web app. So let me give you an example here. So you can see here in this site, it is all those components I have used here, they are all server rendered. So that's why you literally don't see any refreshing or anything, right? But if you go here in the services page, then you can see this component is trying to load. So the same component I have two times here. Let me just make a very small of this screen. Now if I do refresh, then you can see here the second one comes immediately, but the first one, the same component, it is taking some time and basically fetching the data from the server. That's fine because sometimes we need this approach. Now if I go to the network tab and I refresh again, then you can see here there is a call which is going here, this data endpoint, which is basically not going to the CMSLight endpoint, but it goes to the internal server endpoint, NextJs API endpoint basically. And that's really good idea because what happens in that approach is you don't have anything exposed here. So you don't have to expose your API key, you don't have to expose the server that is communicating internally. So they are all hidden, but you get the data that you need here. So for example, in this page, this is a route of services here, and for the service route, you have a component list, which is basically, see here, this here services, sorry, the URL is services, and in the component side you only get this services component, only one component here. On the other hand, the shared page, obviously you will get header and footer and all the other shared data. And I told you before that shared data or shared page basically will be shared between all the pages that you have. Now I'll show you how could you basically create a server component like the second one, and also the same component if you want to fetch the data from the CMS server through the client fetching approach, then how that's going to be. See here, it's loading and then it comes. All right, so let me go into the implementation real quick. So here we have basically so let me go and check the component. This is basically what we do, and the what we do, you can see here, this is the server facing one. So when we say server facing, we don't need to declare whether this component is a client component or a server component, right? So you don't need to have that. But in that services, the same component that I have used, so I just renamed this one to services. I need to use client, here at the very first line. That basically tells the next that, hey, this component is a client component, and there are some rules of thumb. If you want to use client component or server component, you basically then allow. So if you use, for example, anything like use effect, use state, all those client side manipulation things, then you cannot use that component as a server component. So you have to use this client instead of, you need to use client basically, and that will tell next, hey, this is basically a client component. So the client component side, see here I have used use effect, use state, and in the use effect, what I am doing basically is the very interesting thing here is I am basically calling this load data when the component will be loaded, and it is calling the data from my API data endpoint. That basically here. So if you follow the next syntax, which is basically you can have a API folder, and underneath that you can have a route like this, and you could literally access this one through API/data. If you have any other name here, then you can use that one. It's a slug basically. So the name that you would define here, that would be basically your API endpoint name. And here in this route, what I have here is I have used this environment variable, and through the environment variable I am basically getting my CMS host, which is basically, it doesn't matter, it can be public, but website ID and API key, I would definitely prefer that to be hidden so that you don't need to expose that onto your endpoint. But you can do this, there is no harm, but it is always better if you expose that on through the environment and use it like this way. Then what will happen is, since this is the server side of your Next, right? So this API will basically not be exposed in the browser. So it will go and call this endpoint from your component, client component, and you basically wrap all the security information here, so that will not be exposed to the client. So that would be a good idea. And here you could apply things like this revalidate and all the other caching option, which is very good when you are using Next, because Next has this static site generation and server-side rendering. It is a app route, so you don't have explicitly that one, but what you could do is you could use this approach, API route approach, and you could still use that kind of caching from the Next. Now the other thing I want to show you that when I'm using the client approach, then right, so you are basically calling that on, you're getting the data and you are setting in your states, and then through the states you are basically exposing the data in that component HTML. And when we are using the server component, basically what we are doing here, this is also very interesting. So in the server component, I am not calling any API here, but what I am doing here is I am passing the data here. And how I am passing the data here is I am actually using the parent component, I am passing it here. So where is my parent component? Parent component is here, and from here I am using this basically not there, so it is my service. So here, so this services, so this is a route, this is a slug, so I'm not using any slug, I'm using an explicit naming. So you can literally access your local host or the host that you have /block /about /services. So in the services, this page.tsx, you could also introduce layout.tsx here if you have a common layout in this, but I did not use any layout here. I use the root layout, which is here, and this layout is shared between all the pages, so I don't need a separate layout here for services. But here what I have done is in the page I basically have two components. So one is this services component, which is basically a client facing, so I am not passing any data here, I'm just using it, and inside there I have used that, I already explained that how could you do that through the API routing and make the thing secured, even though it is a client facing, but it would be secured. And for server facing, you don't need to worry anything about it, because server facing will be server means this component will be rendered in the server, so you don't get anything exposed literally. So here how do we do component that I'm using, this is a server facing, and you can see here I'm using this component.services data inside this props, and then where I'm getting data is there. So how I am actually using, so here the interesting thing is I'm not using any use state, I'm not using any component did mount or this use effect kind of method, because this is a server side rendered, so I don't need to use them. And then here what I am doing is I am directly calling, since this is a server rendered, I did not mention anything use client here, means it is a server rendered. So what will happen is it will load in the server side, and then it will basically call the fetch data function, and this function basically will directly call this. So I am directly using my host name here, sorry, my CMS host name, so I don't need to go through the API route, but I can simply call my direct server here, because this is server rendered anyway, you don't need to worry. And then I'm getting the response, and that response basically I'm passing to my server side component that I have. So yeah, that make my this actually gives me a couple of benefits. I guess the main benefit is the performance, so it would be rendered from the server, you will get the HTML automatically when you will get everything in the HTML browser. That's the very first. And second thing is it would make your things all secured, and you can also utilize all the server side caching and all the other benefit of Next. On the other hand, these services, this is also sometimes we need, because sometimes you might need to fetch some data in the client side. So what you could do is you could follow this approach, you could use the API route approach of Next, and then you can make those things secured as well. Yeah, I guess that's pretty straightforward, and I believe that you clearly understand what I mean here, what I wanted to send the message here. Okay guys, okay, I think that's all for today. I'll catch you in my next video very soon. Bye bye.